Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, I am absolutely thrilled to get into today's source material because we're looking at a completely wild period of history. We're going to unpack the rapid, violent, and frankly fascinating succession of three absolute heavyweights: the Babylonians, the Persians, and finally, the Greeks under Alexander the Great. We aren't just memorizing dates on a page here, we're going to experience this history through some truly incredible archaeological artifacts. So let's step right into the geopolitical arena of the ancient Near East. So here's our roadmap for over 300 years of crazy history. 1. The rise of the Neo-Babylonians. 2. The Hanging Gardens mystery. 3. The mighty Persian Empire. 4. Provincial life and economics. And 5. Alexander the Great's conquest. Right, let's establish our timeline real quick just to ground us. It's honestly mind-blowing how fast geopolitical power shifted back then. Look at this. In 612 BC, the once invincible Assyrian Empire falls, and Babylon steps up. But less than a century later, in 539 BC, Babylon itself gets swallowed by the Persians. Fast forward a couple hundred years to 333 BC, and that massive Persian Empire gets crushed by Alexander. Literally 3 world-dominating empires rising and falling in just a few short centuries. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Rise of the Neo-Babylonians, from Rebellion to Empire. So the Neo-Babylonian Empire essentially just stepped right into the power vacuum left by the Assyrians, taking over all their old territory. The whole thing starts when King Nabopolassar pulls off this successful revolt and actually conquers the ancient capital of Nineveh in 612 BC. But the name you probably recognize is his son, the infamous Nebuchadnezzar, who takes the crown in 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar is the guy who conquered Judah, destroyed Jerusalem, and kicked off the famous Babylonian exile, basically copying the exact same mass deportation playbook the Assyrians used. But here's the catch. Unlike the Assyrians, this Babylonian empire only held on for a few decades. After Nebuchadnezzar, you get the string of really weak rulers, and it all culminates with the de facto ruler, Belshazzar. If you know your biblical history, Belshazzar is the king from Daniel chapter 5. You know, the one throwing this massive debauchery-filled banquet who literally sees the writing on the wall and ends up losing Babylon to the Medes and Persians that exact same night. And this really gives you a sense of just how stunning Babylon was during its brief time on top. This is a beautiful reconstruction of the famous Ishtar Gate, literally one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Just look at those gorgeous glazed blue bricks, totally covered in lions and mythical creatures from their religion. You can actually see parts of this reconstructed today in the Berlin Museum. Seeing something like this, you truly grasp the sheer grandeur and spectacle that these ancient cities actually possessed. Moving right along to Section 2, the Hanging Gardens mystery, fact or fiction? Ask yourself this for a second. Where exactly were the fabled Hanging Gardens of Babylon? The old legend tells us the king of Babylon built them specifically for his wife, simply because she missed the mountainous terrain of her homeland and absolutely hated the flat, boring Tigris-Euphrates Valley. But here's the thing. Despite massive, intensive archaeological digs, their actual location is a total ghost. Nobody can find them. Well, the modern myth-busting theory on this mystery is just wild. Now, the traditional view, the one backed up by classical Greek historians and early archaeologists, says the gardens were definitely in Babylon. But British Assyriologist Stephanie Daly threw a total wrench in that. She proposes that the Greek historians just flat out got it wrong. According to her research, the gardens weren't Babylonian at all. They were actually built by the Assyrians over in Nineveh. It's a huge, hotly debated question in archaeology right now. As the source material points out, a lot of people would probably shed real tears if the iconic Hanging Gardens of Babylon turned out to actually be the Hanging Gardens of Nineveh. But, regardless of where they were actually located, getting enough water up to such a massive elevated structure would have required some incredibly serious engineering. They most likely used an Archimedes screw, which you can see depicted right here, to actively pump the water upwards. But honestly, the exact timeline for when this technology was even invented is still a huge puzzle. Did the Assyrians or Babylonians actually invent it themselves? Or was it created way later and just written back into the history books by classical authors? We really still don't know for sure. All right, Section 3, the mighty Persian Empire, expansion and edicts. Okay, so when Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon in 539 BC, he launches an empire that literally dwarfed everything before it. Just think about the sheer macro scale here. The Persian Empire stretched all the way from the Indus Valley in the Far East, straight through Egypt, across Asia Minor, and all the way into the Balkans in northern Greece. It was this tremendously powerful, incredibly well-oiled machine that ran the show for about 200 years. And here's a totally wild fun fact for you. The crazy efficiency of their royal courier system is actually what inspired the famous "neither snow nor rain nor heat" motto that the US Postal Service still uses today. And nothing showcases the glory of the Persians quite like their capital, Persepolis. Just check out that monumental stairway. It actually has carvings showing Persian nobles literally climbing up into the palace. Back in the day, these surviving stone columns would have been paired with these magnificent wooden ones, likely carved straight from the famous cedars of Lebanon, holding up this incredibly expansive, beautiful roof.
But the thing to remember is the Persians weren't just ruthless conquerors. They entirely flipped the script on how you manage an empire. Just a year after taking Babylon, Cyrus drops this massive edict. It basically told all the deported peoples and captives they were free to go back to their homelands and resettle. That is a huge geopolitical pivot. For the Jewish people, it meant that groups led by figures like Zerubbabel could actually go back to Judah, rebuild Jerusalem, and reconstruct the temple. Though what's kind of fascinating is that our source notes the returning exiles were probably the minority. Over the decades, most Jewish families had just comfortably assimilated into the Babylonian and then the Persian way of life, and they just decided to stay put.
Which brings us to Section 4, Provincial Life and Economics, the micro-details. So, to manage this mind-boggling amount of territory, the Persians set up a super strict provincial system. The ancestral homeland of Judah was turned into the province of Yehud. And what's really interesting here is that it was overseen by Jewish governors that the Persians appointed themselves, most famously the biblical figure Nehemiah. The empire kept a really tight grip on local agriculture and taxes, setting up an official collection system that used these stamped storage jars. But arguably the biggest economic game-changer during the Persian era was the massive, widespread adoption of coined money out in the provinces. To really wrap your head around the scale of this new local economy, you gotta look at the actual cash. The very first Jewish coins ever minted in Jerusalem under Persian rule were just unbelievably tiny. We are talking about pure silver coins that were about the diameter of a 16-penny nail. That is literally half the size of a modern US dime. We've got it hugely magnified here just so you can actually see the details, but this tiny little coin features Paleo-Hebrew letters spelling out Yehud right next to a little sprig of grain. It's a tiny artifact, but it represents the massive empire-wide economic system the Persians built. And amazingly, the legacy of this little silver piece is still with us. Modern Israeli shekel coins actually use variations of this exact ancient Persian-era design. Okay, last chapter. Section 5. Alexander the Great's Conquest, the Final Implosion. By the 4th century BC, the once unstoppable Persian Empire was getting seriously corrupt, basically rotting from the inside out. And their timing couldn't have been worse, because that's exactly when this brilliant young military prodigy shows up, Alexander the Great. Alexander just unleashes this rapid, devastating string of defeats on them. First at the Granicus River, then Issus, and finally Arbela. In every single one of these battles, Alexander's Greek forces went up against increasingly massive Persian armies and just completely dismantled them, causing the total implosion of Persian power. Which leads us right to the dramatic, fiery end of the whole Persian era. In 331 BC, Alexander captures their crown jewel, the magnificent capital city of Persepolis. You remember that beautiful city with the monumental staircases we just looked at? Well, all that stunning wooden architecture, those towering cedars of Lebanon, Alexander's forces just burned the whole thing entirely to the ground. This great geopolitical powerhouse that had absolutely dominated the ancient world for 2 centuries was just reduced to ash. And that leaves us with this final, kind of haunting thought. We've just watched the Assyrians fall to the Babylonians fall to the Persians, and the mighty Persians get absolutely crushed by the Greeks, and all of that happened in a span of just about 300 years. If 3 unbelievably mighty empires can rise up, dominate the known world, and then just burn to ash that quickly, what forgotten artifacts are we leaving behind for future archaeologists to dig up? It really kind of puts our own moment in history into perspective, doesn't it? Thanks so much for exploring the geopolitical arena with me today. Keep asking those big questions, keep digging, and I will catch you next time.